All right, good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Irwin Zalkin, I-R-W-I-N-Z-A-L-K-I-N. I'm the senior partner of the Zalkin Law Firm. We're here in San Diego and New York and Colorado. We have asked you here today to help explain to you what it means for victims now that the Boy Scouts of America National Organization has filed a bankruptcy in Delaware. From my own experience, I was appointed by the district court here in San Diego, Judge Leo Pappas, as liaison counsel on behalf of 144 victims to represent them in the San Diego Diocese bankruptcy filing in 2007. And having been through that experience, I have some familiarity with what victims should expect from the bankruptcy that's been filed by the Boy Scouts National Organization. So from the Boy Scouts standpoint, and let me make it clear that the only Boy Scout entity, and we'll talk about how the Boy Scouts are organized, that has filed for bankruptcy protection is the Boy Scouts of America National Organization out of Texas. So what does that mean? What happens when a bankruptcy gets filed? First of all, this is a reorganization bankruptcy, a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It's an effort by the Boy Scouts to stop all of these lawsuits or potential lawsuits that they are going to are facing and will likely be facing in various state courts around the country, especially California, New York, New Jersey, Hawaii, where we have what we call window legislation. There have been changes in the law that have opened a window of opportunity in these various states for victims to file lawsuits against not only the Boy Scouts, but the Catholic Church and other organizations where their claims were barred by the old statutes of limitations. So there's this new opportunity that these states are legislating for victims. And in part, that has driven the Boy Scouts to file a bankruptcy because the first thing they want to do is stop all of these lawsuits. So when you file a bankruptcy, the first thing is that you get an automatic stay of all of these various state court proceedings. So instead of having lawsuits going on in possibly 50 different states in the country, they're now going to be forced into filing claims within the bankruptcy court in the state of Delaware. And so from the Boy Scout standpoint, it's moving and shifting all of these cases into one venue. The other advantage for the Boy Scouts is that they will ask the court to issue what's called a bar date. And a bar date is essentially a type of statute of limitations that can be shorter and will likely be shorter than many of the state statutes of limitations. So when the court issues a bar date, let me give you an example. In California now, we have this 3-year window where victims who were barred before can bring their cases. The bankruptcy judge in Delaware may just say, well, we're going to have a 1-year bar date, and you're going to have to file your claims within 1 year. So there's a certain urgency now for victims of Boy Scout sexual abuse to file a claim within whatever that bar date is going to be. We don't know yet. That's not something that the court has issued yet. Today is the first day that they're having hearings, and the hearings today are just asking the bankruptcy judge for permission to allow them to use some of their funds to keep their daily operations going. So that's what's happening today. But there will be a bar date issued. We don't know what that's going to be. The other advantage to the Boy Scouts, in some sense, is that this now forces the hand of their insurance companies, to some extent, to make a decision on what the insurance companies will do with respect to covering these claims and providing funds to the Boy Scouts to assist them in creating a pool of money that can be made available through the bankruptcy to pay for these claims of the victims. At some point, those assets will be determined by the bankruptcy judge. What are those assets? And the other side of that, the flip side of the asset part of the bankruptcy, is how are we going to determine what the value is of the claims of each of these victims? That's going to be part of the bankruptcy process, and there's numbers of ways that that is done. So in some sense, they may release some cases to go to trial and actually try the cases and get jury verdicts to get sort of a benchmark of what juries might do, and then use those benchmarks as a way of trying to get to a valuation of these claims. Or they might look at what the historical values have been, what has happened in settlements or other jury verdicts in cases like this. It takes some time, and there's different ways that the courts, the bankruptcy court, and the victims will negotiate how to do that. Victims, our clients have called many, and our Boy Scout clients, and said, well, how long is this going to take? Oh my God, this is a bankruptcy, this might take forever. Well, no, actually, this may actually speed up a resolution of the process. It may. Now, I'm not saying it will, but it may. Because in the state courts, we may have to go litigate some of these cases, and it could take 3 to 5 years with appeals and that sort of thing. This may be a much quicker, shorter process than that. We don't know yet. It's early in the game, and we don't know yet how this is going to unfold. But that, I'll give you an example. The San Diego Diocese bankruptcy was done in 7 months. And in 7 months, they paid out almost $200 million to 144 victims. We got it done quickly in that case. So it can be done quickly. Now, there's going to be a dispute in this bankruptcy. There's going to be a very, very big dispute in this bankruptcy. The Boy Scout National is the organization that filed the bankruptcy. And the bankruptcy, in the bankruptcy, they specifically did not include their local councils. The way the organization, or way the Boy Scouts are organized, is a very top-down organization. You have the national organization, the National Council, and then you have regions and sections, and then you have the local council. So there's a San Diego local council, there's an Orange County local council, and those councils have assets. Those councils have, in some cases, scouting camps, they have properties, they have buildings, they have assets. Now, the Boy Scouts, when they filed that petition, their petition for bankruptcy, did not include the assets of the national organization. They only included their own assets, and which they've estimated to be between $1 billion and $10 billion. We're going to be arguing in this bankruptcy that the local councils belong to the national organization. We're going to be arguing that the assets of the local council belong to the national. The national has complete control over the local council, almost complete control over the local council, and what activities they do, how they do it, who can be a scoutmaster, who can be a scout, what uniform guidelines are to be enforced through the local councils. They have a tremendous level of control over the local councils, and their bylaws include the local councils as part of the Boy Scout chartered organization. The Boy Scout National has in fact borrowed money and collateralized that money with properties belonging to the local councils. So they're going to have a hard time, in my view, of trying to create this separateness that they would like to create. It's not dissimilar to what the Diocese of San Diego did in their bankruptcy. In their bankruptcy, they claimed that the parishes were separate and apart from the diocese, and they didn't include the assets of the parishes in their filing, their bankruptcy filing, and in their assets until they were forced to through our litigation in the bankruptcy. Once that happened, clearly the amount of assets that they had went up dramatically, which I think will be the case with the Boy Scouts eventually. The other question is whether the stay in bankruptcy that stops lawsuits against the national applies to the local council and to what we call chartered organizations or sponsoring organizations. Almost all of the troops, the Boy Scout units, the troops themselves, are sponsored by some kind of an organization. The Mormon Church was the biggest in the country. The Mormon Church actually used Boy Scouts as their youth-serving organization for young boys. And so they sponsored a lot of the troops, and a lot of the Lions Club and schools and others sponsored those troops. And in many instances, those organizations may have legal responsibility for the scoutmasters or scout leaders who were perpetrators, because they are the first line of vetting of those perpetrators. Many of those perpetrators actually come from that sponsoring organization and become scout leaders in the scouting program. So there's a lot that needs to be determined in this bankruptcy. The main takeaways are that it's going to stop all of these potential lawsuits or lawsuits that are in place right now against the national. We don't know what's going to happen against, if it'll stop the complaints against the local councils and the charter organizations, but that's something that we've got to determine yet in the bankruptcy. But most importantly, is what does this really do for victims? How does this impact victims? And I've asked Mike Hernandez, Robert is his first name, but he goes by Mike. Mike Hernandez is one of our clients, to talk to you folks a little bit about how this makes him feel, what his concerns are, because I think he is representative of what most scouts are feeling right now. Most victims of scouting are feeling right now. So with that, Mike, are you can stand. Do you like him to sit or stand? Stand over here. Come on over here.
I've been able to put this in compartments in my head, and every once in a while I open it up, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. 8 years ago, I contacted Irwin because I wanted other people not to go through what I had gone through. I wanted to protect kids. But 8 years ago, we were banned or barred from going forward. And Irwin said that he was going to put my name, my number on a piece of paper. And then I haven't heard anything from him until October. He said that there's possibly going to be a new law that's going to lift the statute of limitations. And I appreciate that phone call. I've never talked about this to anybody. I've talked to my dad, and it's the second time I've seen him cry. I am here because I don't want anybody to hide from bankruptcy, hide behind it. Like I wanted to protect kids a long time ago, I think the kids need to be protected. And I don't think it's right for anybody to hide behind a bankruptcy to get away with something.
If you have any questions, just ask a few questions.
Can you tell us a little bit about what happened to you?
I believe I was stalked. Got invited to, his name was Mr. Falah, to his house, and was molested there with 3 other boys. And then on a so-called badge, wearing a badge, we went to a river and did a little bit of arrow shooting. Then and went out again. You know, this was some group, then I went out again with just by myself. You know, I feel that he at one time wanted to do it again, but I refused to hang out with him, and that caused problems with me and my mom and dad for a long time. They didn't know.
All these years later, you can see how it has affected you. How has it affected your entire life?
Anger. It was always control. When I was younger, I got in a lot of fights, and it was more about protecting kids from bullies. You know, you're gonna pick on him, what you pick on me, and always cried after. But it's always been kind of controlled. I've never talked about it to anybody until I sat down with him in November. It's just, you know, just keep it in, you know?
Well, this is certainly the best way you can hit them back. Certainly.
Yeah, I thought about it many times, what would happen, you know, and it was good that it didn't come out when I was younger. You know, it was when my dad, you know, he was an officer in the Air Force, and I don't know what happened. My mom's told me what he would have done, and you know, who knows? You know, but you know, it's like I said, I've always been able to keep a compartment, but that compartment's really been an anchor, you know, not something that's good.
So what would you like to see happen?
Justice, accountability, protection.
And what does that look like? The accountability and
I have
justice?
no idea. Going to jail. No kids getting hurt.
Do you know if the abuser, in your case, is dead or?
I have no idea. That question has come to my mind a couple of times with finding him, you know, but it was always not a good thing, you know. You know, at that time, you know, just dealing with it, it's been easier than what could happen.
One mentioned you went to the abuser's house with a couple of other boys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, were the other boys also assaulted?
No.
You don't know, or they weren't?
Well, I really don't want to talk about it.
They were. They were.
Was this in San Diego?
No, it was Merced. My dad was in the Air Force, and the last place he was stationed was Merced.
One of the things that you may not know, but the Boy Scouts since the 1920s have maintained files on accused perpetrators or known perpetrators within their organization. They're called the ineligible volunteer files or ID files. They used to call them the perpetrator files, P files. They kind of softened that term. They've kept that very quiet, very secret. Some efforts were made in 2012 in a case up in Oregon by the LA Times to get access to these files, at least the files that were used in that case. And ultimately, the Oregon Supreme Court allowed those files to be made public, and they range from 1965 to 1985. So in some instances, we're able to go to those files and see if there are perpetrators are in those files. Not always, because if they got reported in 1996 or 1997, we don't have access to that. So we only have access to a kind of a smaller range of those files.
So you have 14 victims. Where on the chart?
We have 25.
Okay.
27.
Where on the chart is, you mentioned that the ones that have sued the National Council are being stalled. Are yours?
We have sued the National Council, the local council, and in several of them, the chartering organizations. So right now, we're not sure. We know the National Council, the case is the state as to them, but we still have to determine whether there's gonna be a stay as to the local council or the chartering organizations. We know the Boy Scouts are gonna ask for that. We've been in touch with their attorneys, and they've said they're gonna ask for a channel, what's called a channeling injunction, to stay these cases that aren't really in the bankruptcy, but are collateral to the bankruptcy.
And in your experience with the diocese bankruptcy, are the settlements usually lower when these things happen? I know you mentioned it goes faster.
Well, it's very hard to say. It really is all gonna depend on what the ultimate asset pool is and what the valuation of these cases is gonna turn out to be. In the case of the Diocese of San Diego, the payments to victims were in line with what the cases were resolving for statewide, even when they weren't in the bankruptcy. So the bankruptcy didn't affect that.
How long will the cases be stalled or frozen?
Well, that's gonna be as long as it takes to conclude the bankruptcy. So they're gonna stay these cases, or at least the national will be stayed until a bankruptcy, there's a resolution either by the acceptance of a plan or by a dismissal of the bankruptcy. So, it's just gonna depend.
So that could be months or years?
Could be, yeah. It's gonna take some time. I mean, this one's not gonna be over quickly, I can tell you that. It's gonna be a while. But, it may be quicker than litigating some of these cases.
Irwin,
How many instances and how old was your victim when this happened?
He was about 12 years old, 11, 12 years old, and there were at least 2 or 3 incidents, right? Yeah, pretty aggressive. I don't wanna get into the details of it, but aggressive.
And the abuser, do you know, was he part of these IV files?
He's not, we've looked.
He's not listed?
He's not in.
He's not in what's been published?
What's been published, we don't have access yet
Right.
to, and one of our big concerns is with the bankruptcy, are we ever gonna get access to these records?
Sure.
That's part of the concern, and I'll tell you what we did with the San Diego Diocese. We made it a part of the settlement in a bankruptcy that they had to publish their known or credibly accused bad priest files, which they ultimately did. So that was actually a part and parcel of the settlement agreement. So I think, speaking for our firm and I think others that are involved in these cases, we're gonna be pushing hard for the Boy Scouts to be, if there's a resolution in that bankruptcy, that's gonna include publishing or some way making accessible those IV files.
But in this case, what was the name of the alleged abuser?
His name was Jerry Falla, F-A-L-L. We think it's spelled F-A-L-L-A-H.
And was he a scoutmaster or?
Yeah.
Irwin, do you want to point out the highlighted
Yeah,
things on
so
there?
what I've got on these charts that are over here to my left, what you'll see, these are some pages out of the petition that was filed in the bankruptcy by the Boy Scouts, and the highlighted ones are what I think are probably most interesting and relevant. As you'll see on number 14, it says estimated number of creditors. Most of those creditors are going to be the scout victims. They're called tort creditors, the scout victims. And they've estimated 1,000 to 5,000 victims. I don't know, I think that might be an underestimate, but that's what they've estimated. Then they have estimated below that in number 15 what their assets are, and they've indicated between 1 billion and 10 billion in assets. And then on the next board over on numbers 18, that's their liabilities. They estimate that their liabilities are between $500 million and $1 billion. So as you can see, even by these estimates, they have substantial assets that are available to address these claims. And that, I don't know if they've included insurance coverage in these estimates of their assets or not, that I can't tell.
But what about the assets of the councils, especially San Diego Imperial, do you know?
Yeah, they
what
have.
their assets are?
I don't know what their assets are, but I know there's a big old camp up in, I think it's called
Matagoi?
No, it's up by Warner Springs. It's Lone Valley, I think they call it. It's a big scout camp that's up there outside of Escondido.
Why do you think it's going to be tough to sort of get rid of those assets? Those local assets, why do you think it's going to be difficult? You thought it'd be difficult for them to sell them off?
No, what I was saying is it's going to be difficult for them to argue that the assets of the local councils aren't part of the Boy Scout national assets.
Well, wouldn't those need to be sold off if they're going to be included?
Well, they may have to sell them off or take loans against them, but yeah, that's going to be the issue. Is we're going to claim that that's part of what they have available to them to respond to these claims. Those assets of the locals, whether they borrow money and collateralize it with properties owned by the locals, which they've done in the past, or they sell these assets and cash them out and use them as part of the fund. That's going to be up to how they want to do it. But the big key issue is the local councils have substantial assets, and we believe that the local councils and those assets should be included as part of the asset pool of the national.
Can you articulate once again why victims of scouting abuse who've not come forward yet, why it's imperative for them to come forward now?
Yes, sure. So again, bankruptcy is a federal court, federal system that takes priority or precedent over state law. And where you might have a statute of limitations like in California that now allows a 3-year period of time for victims who were barred from being able to bring a claim to now bring a claim, the bankruptcy court can shorten that 3-year time frame by creating a bar date, what's called a bar date, which is kind of like a statute of limitations that's shorter. So a judge may say, and I'm not encouraging the judge to do this by saying this, but hypothetically, a judge could say, we're not going to wait 3 years to see what the universe of claims is. We're going to have a 1-year time frame, and you know the Boy Scouts are going to be burdened with putting notice out and publicizing as much as they can that there is now this 1-year time frame that people need to file their claims. That the burden is going to be on them, the debtor, in bankruptcy, to make that known to people. So
That doesn't happen, that's just hypothetical.
this is hypothetical. A bar date will be imposed. It has to be. That's part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hypothesizing as to what that might be. I don't know if it'll be a year or 2 years. I don't know, but it could be shorter than what state statutes of limitations allow.
And what were the other states that had these windows?
Well,
California, of
there's
course.
New York has open a 1-year window in August. New Jersey has, I think, a window now, a 1-year window. I think it is in California, a 3-year window. Hawaii is had a window. I think it's reopened the window. And there might be others.
Out of your 25, how many are to the National Council? Do you know? Out of the 25?
27.
Oh, 27. How
Yeah.
many are,
Well, they're all national. I mean, you're going to sue, in every case, you're going to sue the national. Every case you sue the national.
And how many are the California or the San Diego Imperial?
Our firm doesn't, we don't have any right now.
Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, and how many of those 27 are in California?
All of them.
yeah,
And
you're-
part of them we're in partnership with Gillian Dumas and the Dumas Law Firm out of Oregon. She does a lot of Boy Scout cases.
Could you spell his name for us?
Michael Hernandez, Hernandez. Good, thank you all, appreciate you coming.